Fellow Zionists, thank you for joining Jewish National Fund USA's weekly briefing. I am Salisbury and president of Jewish National Fund USA. It is day 180 of the war in Israel. Nearly 6 months has elapsed since that Black Shabbat in Israel. And this Sunday, April 7th, there will be rallies from New York to Washington, D.C. to raise our voices on behalf of the 134 hostages still being held in Gaza to bring them home now. Our first guest today is Richard Hurowitz. Richard is a writer, investor, and publisher. He's the author of the best-selling book, In the Garden of the Righteous, The Heroes Who Risked Their Lives to Save Jews During the Holocaust, published by HarperCollins in 2023. Richard is an expert on Holocaust rescue, genocide, and war crime prevention. Richard's writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Times of London, the Los Angeles Times, the Daily Beast, the Boston Globe, USA Today, CNBC, and the Jerusalem Post. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. So yes, I wrote a book about the 1 out of 20,000 people who saved Jews during the Holocaust. So I am an inveterate optimist. But I also I wear a number of hats, and so I think I have a fairly realistic view of what's going on in the region right now. I was part of the Council on Foreign Relations. I was on the advisory committee of the task force that came up with the U.S.-Saudi a proposal for a U.S.-Saudi alliance, which was one of the kind of foundations of what was almost going to and probably will still happen. So I will say I'm an inveterate optimist, and I actually have a contrarian view that there is a significant possibility that October 7th, in retrospect, after all the horror is over, may in fact be a linchpin that led to comprehensive peace in the region. But I just want to say, I say that as somebody who it's not a Pollyanna view. It's based on, very, realpolitik and geopolitical kind of analysis, and actually talking to people in the region, particularly Arabs. And I do a lot of business in the region. And so I had written an article for Time a few months ago outlining some of this. And I just would say that this is based to some degree on some of it is open source and some of it is just conversations. But it frustrated me the extent to which, particularly in the United States, people didn't really understand what the Arab world was trying to accomplish. So what I would say is that I think that, and I'll say a few things that are probably quite obvious to many people on the call, but this was all about Iran. I think that in retrospect, this may be what you could term a catastrophic success for Hamas and for Iran. I don't think they ever realized that that this could happen to the extent that it did happen, the atrocities. And I think there's some serious consequences to them. I think it's made a U.S.-Saudi compact more likely. I think the initial compact that was very close to happening was potentially going to happen without a Palestinian state. Now I think that will be part of it. But I think that this has made the Saudis more concerned about having both Israel and the United States as an ally. And I would stress that the United States is the far more important issue for them than the Israelis. And so the security guarantee from the United States and some of the other things going along with that are the holy grail. But they also are very concerned behind closed doors that the Israelis actually finish the job here. And so, you have to separate what is said publicly with what is said privately. But I will note that, if you parse clearly the statements of like the Emirates and even the Saudis, they've been remarkably pro-Israel from the beginning and anti-Hamas. I think they're very worried, as are we, about the Iranian proxies. For whatever reason, we've opted to kind of respond with one arm tied behind our back. Iran bombed Pakistan a few weeks ago. Pakistan bombed Iran, and they're not going to bomb Pakistan again. But I think one thing that people in the West really don't understand is the concern that a lot of people in the region have about Hamas. They're not well liked. The fact that the Egyptians will not open the Rafah gate says it all. They know what the Muslim Brotherhood is. And the other thing to understand, I think, about it is that to the Iranians, like Hamas is probably the least important of their proxies. They're Sunni and they're Arab. And so I think, it's pretty, right now Israel is in the process of restoring its deterrence. But, I think it would shock a lot of people on college campuses to know that the Egyptians came to the Israelis. And I think this is fairly public, a number of years ago during one of the missile attacks, and suggested to the Israelis that they kill every one of the Hamas fighters at that time. But of course, Israel doesn't do that kind of thing. And the IDF is actually conducting a campaign that is, probably, I think, has more precautions taken to protect civilians than the United States does. And the United States puts a high value on doing that, to the detriment of the safety of our own soldiers. So to lay out kind of like what a peace plan might have, like why I think that could happen, I think this has potentially could clear the way. Again, people make a lot of mistakes, but one thing that happened is obviously it united Israel, which I think was very dangerous. When I was in college, I studied Roman history, and we, the Jewish people spent 2,000 years in exile, largely because of fighting amongst ourselves. So if you go back and look at what happened, there could have been a deal. It was really the extremists who caused the ultimate break with the Romans. The love of Titus's life was a Jewish princess named Bernice. And so I think that's important to understand. But I think after October 7th, the whole country for the moment is united, or most of it. I think, as I actually am out talking about my book with a lot of JCCs and, particularly Reform synagogues, I'm told by, the rabbi or the head of it that all of the young people went from being very progressive on October 6th to being ardent Zionists on October 7th. So obviously there's a lot of betrayal that's gone on, but I think there's also a wake-up call in the diaspora that is very important as well. I think from a leadership perspective as well, I think, three big impediments to a deal, and I'm not going to make a comment one way or the other about Netanyahu and his, weaknesses or strengths, but I think the approval rating is a disaster, and I don't see a scenario where he is going to survive in the long term, although everyone's been proven wrong. But I do think he is an impediment for a variety of reasons to what I'm about to outline. I think Hamas is going to be severely wiped out. I think anybody who says you can't uproot an ideology is largely wrong. You can look at Al-Qaeda. ISIS is resurging a little bit, but yes, you can't get rid of an ideology, but you can make it very hard for them to take action. So, and I think it's very important that Iran receives a message that there's deterrence from the U.S. and from Israel. And I do think the visit from Blinken to Abbas was very interesting, and there's a lot of pressure now on the Palestinian Authority to clean up its act, which means new leadership. And there are people who the Israelis can work with, and they're not going to be people who are doves, but they're going to have to be people who have sort of anti-Israel credentials. But anybody who watches Fauda, knows that in fact the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority work quite closely together. So they will find, I think, a leader that will be palatable to both sides. It's worth noting that the approval rating of Hamas is much higher in the West Bank than in Gaza, because the Gazans live with Hamas. So I think ultimately the reason why I think there could be peace is because I think greater geopolitical factors are at play, and that it will basically be forced by the United States and the Saudis on the Palestinians, and to some degree on the Israelis. I think, again, this is a secondary issue until recently. It is interesting to look at the protests going on, which have been the loudest in the United States in the left wing, then second loudest in parts of Europe, and it's been almost mute in the Arab world. So the Arab street seems to be remarkably quiet on behalf of Hamas. So, what a two-state solution might look like right now. I mean, even the polls in Israel show that if you ask, are you in favor of a two-state solution? No. Are you in favor of a two-entity solution? Yes, the majority of the population. So I think understanding what a Palestinian state would be is important, and people are already talking about that. And it's the Saudis have already come out and said that they will recognize Israel. The headline on the interview at CNN was like, Saudi stands with Palestine. If you actually watch the interview, it was the foreign minister came out and said that they're supportive of Israel once there's a solution to the Palestinian problem, which obviously they need to facilitate. But they're much more interested in coordinating with Israel and Iran. Behind closed doors, they've become fairly philo-Semitic. So, I think the plan, and Ehud Barak has said this publicly, that one day if there ever is a two-state solution, it's going to look microscopically different from what was offered at Camp David, except there'll be a lot more dead people, unfortunately, on both sides. And that would involve minor land swaps, a completely demilitarized Palestinian sort of state in the West Bank and Gaza. And that is something that not only has the United States endorsed, but Sisi in Egypt endorsed a few weeks ago. So I think the Arab world knows that Palestine would not have an army, would not have a military. There would be a multinational force. The IDF would be deployed along the Jordanian border. There's just no way there would be a tolerated threat to anything with Israel. But that's understood. I think the Arabs will pay, and the world will have to pay for rebuilding Gaza. I think despite what Bibi or anyone else says politically, the Israelis are going to leave Gaza. They'd have no desire to be there. Nobody wants Gaza. The Egyptians won't take Gaza, but there'll have to be a big, sort of Marshall Plan. And I think if there is a deal, there will be some sort of symbolic right of like refugees coming back from the Palestinians, and the rest of it will be a check written by Israel in the West and the Gulf Arabs. And then I think that the Jews who were expelled, who outnumber the Palestinians that were expelled, will get nothing from the Arab countries. East Jerusalem will be the Palestinian capital. West Jerusalem will be Israeli capital. The holy sites will be under joint Israeli and international control. And then I think there would be recognition from the rest of the Arab world, at least the Saudis and the other kind of remaining sympathetic countries. And then people will focus on Iran. And I will say that, again, the Abraham Accords have obviously been a huge success. I know both from a geopolitical, but also a business and a cultural standpoint. That's an example, obviously, of Jews and Arabs who, living together in a successful, treaty. The Egyptian treaty has stood for many decades now, and that was after the Yom Kippur War. Several years later, it would have been, sort of unthinkable at the time when Israel was almost sort of overrun, that you would have peace in the near future. And another example of I think is important is like the Good Friday Agreement, sort of now 25 years old, and the Northern Irish and the Catholic Irish were at that was about as bloody a conflict and as much hate as you could have had, and people don't even really it's been a huge success. And so I do think there actually can be peace in the region, but again, not in the short term based on sort of people just sort of deciding to beat their swords into plowshares, but because again I know that the Arab world wants it, and the US wants it, and that the real issue is Iran, which is also tied in with the real kind of chess game going on between China and Russia and North Korea and Iran and that whole axis. So obviously tons of wild cards, future of Bibi, whether Trump gets back in, whether the Iranians miscalculate, whether the Ayatollah dies. But, I ultimately think Iran itself will actually potentially have regime change, but, we've been waiting for that for a long time. But it is the population is pretty pro-West and actually pro-Israel. So I think maybe I'll stop there if anybody has any questions. I know it's a very contrarian view, but it is one that is being more than talked about in the behind closed doors in the U.S. and Europe and most importantly in the region.
Richard, just a question, although it doesn't have to do exactly with the topic you were speaking of. What do you hear from the spirit of the IDF soldiers? I mean, I think it's I mean, everything I hear there is anecdotal, right? And we all have friends who are fighting there. I mean, I think it's much more difficult than they thought it was going to be, as there's like 500 miles of tunnels. But I think the morale in there is good. I think the Israelis tend to tune out the Western criticism more than people in the West do. I just think Israel has sort of a bunker mentality right now. But I think ultimately that there's Rafah. They're going. I mean, it has to. There's no alternative to
defeating Hamas, and even sort of people on the left, the sort of center left people here and in Europe, and certainly behind closed doors, believe that nobody thinks that it is possible to stop the conflict without Hamas having a full-blown defeat. So I think that, I think IDF's very professional and very, very focused. I think there's going to be a reckoning at the senior leadership, which they know, because it was the most catastrophic failure in the history of the state of Israel.
Yeah. Well, Richard, thank you for your remarks. Many of you know Richard is a member of the JNF Global Speakers Bureau, and you can reach out to us to bring Richard to your regions by visiting jnfglobalspeakers.org. Our next guest is Yoel Rosby. Yoel is a member of the JNF-USA team in Israel and serves as a project manager, ensuring the organization's strategic vision for the land and people of Israel. Yoel has maintained daily contact with our affiliates and communities in Israel as they navigated the early, horrific days of this war, representing all of us at JNF-USA. Yoel, thank you for joining us. And it's great to see you.
Thank you. It's good to see you as well. I just look at this screen and my heart just swells up to see so many hundreds of people. And I know how many people are reading and looking at it afterwards that just care, that just want to show up, that just want to connect in another way, another connection, another session to hear. Richard, thank you for your insights and everything you said. And I just saw to answer, I don't speak for the land of Israel as a whole or for the IDF, but everybody that we've spoken to on the ground here, at various levels, from the person at the gate all the way to top generals. The IDF is strong, and the IDF morale is very high with the soldiers. Anywhere that strategically is planned to go to is gone to, and there's a very high success rate in missions. Not 100%, obviously there's no such thing. So very, very, very strong, all the way from the front, all the way to the back. So we should all be very encouraged by that. And I want to take, for the few minutes that I'm allotted here in this call, as I want to be conscious of everybody's time, is to maybe talk a little bit what's going on from the border inward. It's not foreign to anybody that October 7th, there was chaos. Chaotic. I mean, there's so many more and more detrimental words that we can use for the situation, but chaos is what was going on. And there was people raising money for water bottles, and there were people doing for shoes, and you had this ecosystem that was just exploding with love and just wanting to show up and wanting to be there for the people in the land of Israel. And slowly but surely, the larger players in the game, spearheaded by Jewish National Fund USA, said, wait a minute, let's be strategic about our investments and how we do things. And then as the weeks went on, I want to say there's somewhat of a controlled chaos. It's still chaotic. There's still a lot going on. There's uncertainties. There's variables in this formula called the future of the land of Israel, the future of the human people, of the Jewish people. But slowly but surely, we're creating constants throughout this formula that controls this chaos. And then you can create a strategic, not only thinking, but implementation. From October 8th already, we were thinking strategically, but then it took us a little time to continue and build off that thought process to also implement strategically. On the ground, the country and the directorate that's leading the rehabilitation of the Western Negev came out with a 217-page document of a 5-year plan of how they're going to rehabilitate Israel. Now, I love the land of Israel, the government of Israel. I believe that we are going to be in future and better places. But right now, there is a gap in strategic planning forward and implementation of today. There are people that want to move home. There are people that want to feel safe while moving home. There are people that want to move home to a more beautiful Western Negev. And today, those answers need to be given to them. So we are working in conjunction with the governmental plan, but filling the gaps along with others on the ground to create a hospitable place in the Western Negev for those that want to come home and to come to a more prosperous part of Israel. So just some examples of what we're talking about in long term. If we are working and trying to create a more resilient people, we're talking about resilience centers and psychological treatment. And how is Jewish National Fund moving that along? in regards to there are a lot of variables coming from government funding and other individuals that might have said they would help. And what we are doing on the ground at many of the cross-border regional initiatives is telling the councils, the municipalities, the people, the communities, count on us. Let's move forward with planning. Let's move forward with the tenders and getting the contractors and getting the people to start building. Because without that, and if we wait for everybody else, we are going to push the beautiful return to the Western Negev, a safe, hospitable place, a year and a half forward. So I think the key role, if I can mention and take that 30 seconds to mention it, is that we are on the ground creating a construct that enables the individuals that want to be empowered, that want to return, that want to have a better life in their homes in the Western Negev, and giving them that helping hand, saying, don't worry, we know you don't know how to fund this initiative or that school or that fire station or that emergency response center or that home or that infrastructure for a continuation expansion of your community to house new residents. We know you don't know how to fund it 100%, but we're behind you. We'll help you find it. We'll help you do it. We'll be first in with you. It's taking that risk. There is the controlled chaos of so many people around us that want to help. I think what sets us aside and what we can all, the hundreds of people on this call, can be proud of is that we're all a part of something that is not just thinking strategically 5 years ahead and 10 years ahead, but also strategically today of how we can make a difference that will have a ripple effect for years to come and shorten the time of creating a more prosperous and beautiful Western Negev. Now, one of the things, and this is just a moment from yesterday that I'd like to share and then open it either for questions or continuation, is that we were in a community that next week, over 300 of Jewish National Fund USA volunteers through our missions are going to be going into and completely giving it a facelift, painting the sidewalks all the way to creating shelters, to the schools, to the informal education, to the kindergartens, all the way to their home shop that one of the founders of the Moshav runs and sells the kids icicles after they get home from school. We were sitting in a meeting with our team here in Israel and the community leaders with regional council officials, and the head of the community looks around the table and tells everybody, he said, a lot of people came here to see our community that was infiltrated, to hear my story of my 2 nephews that were killed, to hear the story of after my nephew was killed, he had a baby son 2 weeks afterward. Everybody heard, everybody cried, because you can't not. But Jewish National Fund was the first organization that came back again, that the next week is going to be coming with hundreds of people to put up a banner saying, welcome home, we're with you. So please just realize that every single meeting like that takes place with our amazing Israel team, because the individuals like yourselves get on a call every week, because you get into meetings and rallies and come and give. Because of you guys, we're able to go into those and continue going back to these communities. Don't take your foot off the gas. It's more important than ever to continue giving, because now is the money time. Now is the pivotal moment that people are thinking, should I return home? I don't know what's going to be. Now is the time where we can make the biggest difference and impact than ever before. So if I can leave you with that, that is what we should all walk away with. Thank you. Toda rabba, everybody. I appreciate you giving me your time.
So thank you, Yoel, and just kol hakavod to Tali, you and your entire team. You know, when Lauren and I were over there just a few weeks after October 7th and met with the different leaders of the municipalities, everyone said the same thing. JNF was here October 8th, and they haven't left. And you know, some of the mayors said, we don't know what we would have done without JNF. You know, from every little component that they needed, it was diapers, washing machines, whatever they needed, they called JNF. So thank you, and thank Tali and your whole team for what you're doing. And we'll see you very soon, Yoel. So keep up the good work. So to learn more about the impact you're having on the ground, Visit jnf.org/support Israel. You can read stories of resilience and strength in our latest edition of the JNF-USA Biachad magazine, which hits your mailbox this month. And you can also read it at jnf.org/Biachad. Those links will be placed in the chat. As always, we encourage you to travel to Israel with us on a volunteer working mission. We continue to sell out these missions and have added dates through December of this year. Visit jnf.org/volunteeril to learn more and to register. We will see you next Wednesday, April 10th at the same time. I'm Israel Chai.